We're still on TMI this beautiful morning. Okay, we'll be moving on to the newspaper review, and I have my guest here with me, Mr. Ubong Thomsey. He is a journalist and also a public affairs analyst. Hello, good morning, Mr.
Good morning. Good morning, Mercy. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, and thank you so much for coming for this segment. Okay, we're going to be starting with the Vanguard newspaper this morning. The big headlines on the Vanguard newspaper says presidency Northern Bloc supposed PDP zoning ticket to South. You get that on page 5 from the Vanguard newspaper. Also, ASUU's protests disrupt academic activities on campuses nationwide. You get that on page 8. Still on the Vanguard. Osun drags federal government to Supreme Court over withheld local government allocations. You get that on page 10. Tinubu imposes a 6-month ban on export of raw share nuts. You get that on page 19. Moving on, passengers scamper as Abuja Kaduna train derails. You get that on page 6 from the Vanguard newspaper. Benue Assembly suspends as speakers over Governor Ali's impeachment move. You get that on page 10. Third mainland bridge mishaps. Last man please FRSC differ. You get that on page 10 from the Vanguard newspaper. Nigeria records 46% decline in variant poliovirus cases and PHCDA. You get that on page 9. All right, that is all we have on the Vanguard newspaper this morning. Let's quickly look at the big headlines here that says presidency Northern Blocs oppose PDP zoning ticket to South. Mr. Thomsey, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, we need to ask ourselves one question, because Nigeria has become a country where, the political class want to set in some kind of sentiment or confusion in the political arena. And what we want to ask, what do the North really want? What did the North actually want? Because you have full 8 years tenure being completed by the former president, now late, Muhammad Buhari, for good 8 years. And the North had all, have always had the opportunity, to build themselves, to build infrastructures in the North, to educate the citizenry up North, to actually, prove themselves that, yes, they have reason to retain or to be given this power. But in the past, we have seen, a contrary, situation where the Northern leaders, what they are after is after enriching themselves. And when it's come to politics, political, time, they will want to, in quotes, want to take up every juicy position. And if anything, comes as a difference to that, their desire, government is not working. That is what you hear them saying. Nothing is working, government is not working. They'll make an attempt to destabilize the nation. So when the PDP zoned their presidential candidates to the South, I think that is in conformity with the democracy, the nascent democracy that we are practicing, to make sure that every section of the country are well represented and given a fair, treatment.
Oh, that's a good one. Moving on, we're still on the newspaper review. We'll take a look at this day newspaper. This day newspaper, the big headlines on this day newspaper says, Ribadu, we will hunt terrorists, we will find them and bring them to justice. Okay, IFC leads federal government economic reforms. IMF calls for Marshall plans for power sector. Okay, a sub-writer there says the cries low credit flow to real sector. Another sub-writer said identify sector with investment opportunities to create 780,000 jobs. Another sub-writer said, federal government says making plans to attract big auto manufacturer. You get that on page 9 from the newspaper. Okay, still on the newspaper says, amid costly, unreliable, on-grid supply, Nigerian emerged second largest solar importer in Africa. You get that on page 5 from this day newspaper. Before we move on, let's quickly look at the headlines there that says IFC lures federal government's economic reforms. IMF calls for Marshall Plan for power sector. What is your take on that?
Well, the IFC, you know, fortunately, the government of the day, led by President Tinubu, is also recording some, you know, some kind of positive progress in the way and manner the economy is being run. So, the fact still remains of what impact is all this, you know, progress that has been made in the country, and what are the measurable, you know, terms and conditions that, you know, IFC or IMF can use to measure the growth that Nigeria is attaining today. Because we still find, you know, difficulties in running business. You find a harsh business environment in Nigeria, high taxation, you know, and then a high cost of doing business. As we speak, there's no adequate supply of electricity. And the president just went to Brazil some days ago, if not that he's still there. You know, Brazil, they grow their economy by themselves and make sure that they increase power supply to the people. And this will encourage manufacturing.
Yeah.
And this will also encourage, you know, internal generated revenue. And this will put the nation at a very good standing among the Committee of Nations. So whatsoever, you know, modalities is used to measure this growth, I believe the country needs to look inward and grow its economy.
All right, thank you so much. We're still on newspaper review. We'll quickly take a look at the Nigerian Tribune. The Nigerian Tribune newspaper says, the big headlines there says, Osun takes federal government to Supreme Court over withheld local government allocation. You get that on page 3. Still on the newspaper. ASUU says patience with federal government runs thin as protests sweep campuses. You get that on page 4 from the newspaper. Also 7 injured as Abuja Kaduna train derailed. You get that on page 3 from the newspaper. NSA hands over 128 rescues and for kidnapped victims to family. As operator said, vows to hunt down bandits. You get that on page 3. Surgery, drinks increase hair loss risk, scientists warn. You get that on page 11 from the newspaper this morning. And also Oyo Partners theme to develop Oluyole Free Trade Zone. You get that on page 13 from the newspaper. Okay, we'll quickly look at the big headlines. But before then, on page 11, on page 4 and page 11 says, court orders 6 banks to furnish IGP with account details linked to Showary. Subrighter said, another court orders 5 billion naira in shares linked to ex-army general. You get that on page 4 and also on page 11. Let's talk about this ASUU strike of a thing. ASUU says patience with federal government runs thin, which says as protesters sweep campuses. You get that on page 4. Let's talk about the ASUU strike and all of that.
Yeah, generally is about the insensitivity of governments as regards educational sector, and you know, the primary reason, and if only the government of the day wants to actually make sure that they disseminate and also squash all form of criminality in the society, then the government has the right to invest massively in education, and anything that has to do with ASUU should not be taken with levity. You know, they have been having series of agreements, MOU with the government, and it now boils down to the government to honor the agreement. And if the time frame that was kept for government to respond has elapsed, that is when you see the ASUU, coming on board to praise for their demands and praise for the government to honor the agreement. And this is not, the only time. It's been one time too many, and it's becoming, something ridiculous to the country, where little issues like solving the issue of ASUU cannot be resolved over how many consistent government that have come on board. So we don't want to see situation like that continuing. And when you cannot solve one particular sector problem, it becomes a problem.
Okay, so the government needs to look into this quick. All right, so moving on, we're still on the newspaper review. We'll quickly look at the Punch newspaper this morning. The Punch newspaper, the big headlines on the Punch newspaper says 2027 PDP ticket zoning to South splits not. You get that on page 2. A sub-writer said, parties northern stakeholders to review decision next week. Another sub-writer said, move may favor Tinubu's re-election, one Arewa youth. Another sub-writer said, zoning fair to South, says Middle Belt. Okay, still on the newspaper review from the Punch newspaper. U.S. court jails Osun monarch over $4.2 million COVID-19 fraud. You get that on page 29 from the Punch newspaper. 239 first-class lecturers quit Unilag over poor pay. Ex-VC. You get that on page 7 from the Punch newspaper. ASUU protest rocks campuses ahead federal government talks. You get that on page 29 from the Punch newspaper. And also, withheld allocation, Osun drags federal government to Supreme Court. You get that on page 7 from the Punch newspaper. Probe begins as Abuja Kaduna train mishap injure 6. You get that on page 2 from the Punch newspaper this morning. Let's talk about the Abuja Kaduna train mishap, the incident that happened there.
Yeah, I suggest there might have been a form of sabotage.
Okay.
On that particular federal government infrastructure, and I wonder why the security apparatus that were meant to protect the Abuja Kaduna railway tracks are not enforcing or are not doing their jobs, because before there can be such a derail, I think there must have been some form of sabotage from the terrorists or the criminals, and it's better. So many people were injured, and I don't know how many are reported dead, but however, it's a very, very pathetic situation, because the passengers on board you were seen stranded, some were injured, and the situation is critical. So it calls for urgent attention by the Nigerian Railway Corporation to make sure they carry out monitoring and evaluation on the tracks on probably weekly basis or daily basis or monthly basis to ascertain the condition of the tracks. So it's something that the government has to take on it head on and make sure it safeguards life and property of Nigerians across board.
The government needs to look into that as quick as possible. We're still on TMI. We're still on newspaper review. Let's quickly take a look at the Daily Sun newspaper this morning. The big headlines on the Daily Sun newspaper says, kidnapping, 2.56 billion naira ransom paid in 1 year, reveals report. That is on page 25 from the Daily Sun newspaper. A sub-writer said, Tinubu to unveil reverse national counter-terrorism strategy, October. You get that on page 25. Okay, still on the Daily Sun newspaper, we will wipe out terrorists, bandits, orders to NSA. and over 128 rescues for victims. Okay, still on the newspaper Daily Sun. Okay, still on the newspaper Daily Sun. Newspaper says federal government probes Abuja Kaduna train derailment, suspends operation on the route. You get that on page 2 from the Daily Sun newspaper. Bandits on the rampage in Kaduna. Mother security personnel abducts couple in down track. You get that on page 4 from the Daily Sun newspaper. Again, Governor Mba calls for Nnamdi Kanu's release. You get that on page 26 on the Daily Sun newspaper. ASUU members vote for indefinite strike as protests continue nationwide. You get that on page 6. A sub-writer said protesting lecturer shuts campuses, ongoing exams threaten. That is also on page 6 from the Daily Sun newspaper. Okay, let's take a look at this kidnapping thing that have been occurring, where 2.56 billion naira ransom paid in 1 year, reveals report.
Yeah, I don't know how come about the 2.56 billion report and the modalities and the strategies used in unraveling the money that is being paid, but you can bear with me that there is a lot of other kidnapping cases that government has not been able to track. So if government can report 2.56 billion, and then I believe it's even more than that.
Yeah.
You know, it's more than that. So if that alone can go into the hands of the criminals, and then Nigeria is in a mess. You know, because this same money will be used to, you know, further, you know, buy weapons and carry out their, you know, their criminal act of kidnapping innocent Nigerians. So the statistics is quite, you know, the report, as I may say, you know, is commendable, but government has to look inward, because the basic and fundamental, you know, purpose of government is to safeguard life and property of Nigerians.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ubang Thamsi. Thank you for joining us on the newspaper review this morning. We're still on CMI this morning on ITV. I am Marcelina Unkro. We would be handing over to a Benin Network studio for the continuation on CMI. Stay tuned.